These are notes on digestion and biosynthesis, and you can find more information in your book on pages 303 to 304. There's just a couple paragraphs, and then in more detail and linking it to cellular respiration on pages 372 to 374. All right, so let's take a look at now the matter that's entering and leaving animals. So we've talked a lot about how energy is gained and lost, and we've talked a little bit about how some matter is lost, like in losing weight. But let's now look at what's actually happening as far as matter in a living organism. So these are the materials that go into the cow. So it's mostly water, a lot of carbohydrates, some proteins, some minerals. You know, they eat a lot of grass, and then we're going to say times 1,000, because if you remember, think about an energy pyramid, right? The cow's got to eat a lot more grass compared to the cow, because you lose energy as you go up the pyramid. And as we learned in cellular respiration, most of the food you eat is eaten to produce energy and then exhaled. However, some of it is used to either replace cells that are dying in us, or to make new cells to help us actually grow, as in like a net growth. So in the cow then, that's a lot of protein and some minerals and some water and some fat as well. So one of the questions is, if the cow's not eating any fat, how is it getting fat? So this goes back to that idea, remember, of carbohydrates going through a chemical change because they're made of the same atoms. They're not the same monomers, but they're the same atoms as are in lipids. And so that's how the cow, ends up with so much fat. And then what the cow is losing then, either in their feces or what they're breathing out, and why minerals is in here. Oh, that shouldn't be in there. I guess if it's in urination, yeah, based on that. That the cow is, put that there, losing minerals and carbon dioxide and water from breathing and urination and perspiration, sweating. And then in their feces is the stuff, the extra stuff. So the carbohydrates, some water, also some minerals. So that's sort of where all of the stuff that goes into the cow ends up. All right, so we've seen this before. The food goes into the organism, and then it goes through digestion, and we've talked about cellular respiration. So now we're going to look at materials for growth and biosynthesis. All right, so let's look at our molecules again. We have starch molecules, which are a glucose polymer. We have lipids, we have proteins, we have glucose. And then we also talked about having cellulose, which is another glucose polymer. And we talked about that is the structure, that's what makes up like the cell wall of plants. And that's something that we can't digest. But certainly we eat a lot of fiber, and you should eat a lot of fiber, and so I wanted to put that in here. And we're going to be using different things to represent these. Sometimes I'll use the actual molecules like this, but sometimes I'm going to be using these kind of pictorial representations. So you can see like this is a sugar. So a starch is a polymer of sugars. Cellulose or fiber is also a polymer of sugars, but I'm going to put in these little red guys just to distinguish it from starch. Remember that proteins are made up of different amino acids, which is why these have different shapes. And then here's our lipid with our fatty acids here, 1, 2, 3, and our glycerol there. So let's look at what happens when we eat protein. Now, this is true for any of the macromolecules. I'm not going to go through it for every single one. We're going to go through it for protein. So the way we digest our protein is we break it down into individual amino acids. So we go from this linked chain, or all these amino acids, into these amino acids, individual, or these pieces here. Now, one thing that is a little bit incorrect, I would say, is this using the shapes is more correct because the amino acids are different in different proteins or within one protein. Here you'll notice these are all clearly the same protein. That's simply for ease of making lots of itty-bitty diagrams of things. These water droplets are here because in order to break the protein or the amino acids in the protein apart, you need to add water. So if you actually were able to trace these, and you can actually do this, you would notice that some water has been added to them. And in class, we're going to look at why the water has been added. But it's a chemical reaction, and the reactants are the protein and water yields individual amino acids. So let's look at how that happens. Here is our protein polymer, and here are some 3 waters. So we would expect to then get 3 amino acids. And let's see how that goes. They're going to go into the chemical change. The water will bond to the amino acids, and you end up with the amino acid monomers. And I misspoke. I said you should get 3. You get 4 because you don't end up with a complete water on each one. You end up with hydrogen and oxygen. And again, we're going to look at that in class. So the question then becomes, now as we digest, and we know this happens in all stages of digestion, right? In class with the cracker and spit lab, we started breaking down the starch molecule into individual glucoses. We saw that there was no glucose in the cracker, but then there was glucose in the chewed cracker. So we've already started that chemical reaction using the enzyme amylase in our saliva. This happens in the stomach, it happens in the intestine. So we get all these little molecules. And the reason we get little molecules is because big molecules can't get through cell membranes. So in order to get into the cell, we need smaller pieces. And so once we have these digested monomers, where do they go? Well, the answer is they go into the bloodstream, and then they can go through the cell membrane. But then once in the cell membrane, we want our polymers back. And so they go through another chemical change where they lose the water that was added initially. And we end up with, again, we have our protein polymer and the waters. So the water's added to help break these apart, or to react and break them apart, and then it's removed when they connect back together. And so let's look at what's going on in the cow. Okay, so we've got food molecules in the grass, and those are the large food molecules. The cellulose, the carbohydrates, there is some protein in there, the minerals, water, and then that all goes into the stomach. But remember, the actual chewing actually helps start that digestion, helps that breaking down into smaller molecules. And what enzymes do is they're called catalysts. A catalyst is something that speeds something up. So it, in a sense, your chewing jump starts the digestion process. From the stomach, it goes into the intestines, and in this entire path from in the mouth, not so much in the esophagus, but that's how it gets to the stomach, and then in the stomach, and then in the intestines, that is all the breaking apart of the polymers into monomers. Then, through the pumping of the blood, just like we saw with our O2 and CO2, these monomers get pumped all around to the different cells in the body. And then once in the cells, once they pass through the cell membrane, they reform into whatever cell they happen to be forming. So a muscle cell, or it could be a heart cell, could be a fat cell, all different cells. And then we're not actually using this for this one. But then biosynthesis, bio meaning life, synthesis meaning to come together, to build. So the building of life, biosynthesis is the process of small organic molecules becoming large organic molecules in all the body parts. They start large in our food, we digest them to make them small so that they can be transported around the body and go in through the cell membrane, and then they reform into large molecules. So some of the food we can't digest, like fiber we can't digest. There are certain proteins in grass that we can't digest, but that cows can, as we talked about in one of my classes. Cows are, in a sense, the machine that can turn protein we can't use in our bodies into protein we can use in our bodies, because cows have a different digestive system. They have all their stomachs, 4 stomachs. But the things we can't digest are broken down, are released as waste. So here we have like a little fiber molecule, and that fiber molecule goes through our digestive system and leaves as waste. You can see turns brown, as much waste is. And so one of the reasons we need fiber in our diets is to help keep that waste elimination system healthy. And some fiber can actually absorb a lot of water that our bodies don't need and help that move through as well. So that's why fiber is so important. So let's look at this on a human scale. So here are all of the molecules that go in. We've got our fats, we've got our proteins, we've got some glucose, we've got some fiber, we've got some larger carbohydrates, so some polymers. This was supposed to represent something in particular that I can't remember now. Doesn't matter, but it's a polymer of glucose, so all different things. And so as we digest, and you know, even starting in the mouth, let's go back a second, we start to break that down. Now, some of the food we eat has glucose in it, but then again, through cracker and spit, we know that this also starts in the mouth through that reaction with the amylase enzyme. And then in our stomach and intestines, those get broken down even more into smaller monomers. And then in the bloodstream, so as you can see, that's continuing to happen here in the intestine and stomach, because some of this stuff happens simultaneously. It's not, you know, 1, 2, 3, and not everything moves at the same rate. Inside our large intestine, notice we have our fiber. In our bloodstream, it's all monomers, and then those go from the small intestine into the bloodstream and then go into the cells and go in through the cell membrane. And so they go into the cells. Here we have a body cell, right here, typical body cell. Here we have specifically a fat cell. Here we have specifically a muscle cell. So then, as digestion progresses, our fiber moves along in our large intestine. The molecules are leaving the bloodstream and going into the cells. Some of those molecules are now starting to reassemble into polymers. So we have a fat polymer here in a fat cell, a protein polymer here in a muscle cell. And when I say typical body cells, I mean, you know, a skin cell, for example, a heart cell. Heart's a muscle, actually, so that's not a good example. But a lot of the cells in our body have all different polymers in it, macromolecules. Some, like muscle, are very protein heavy. Fat cells are obviously very fat heavy. And we continue along. At some point, the fiber leaves our large intestine as waste. The monomers leave the bloodstream and are all kind of in their respective places. Now notice, as I go from here to here, I've lost a glucose. Some of that glucose is now used as energy to drive, you know, the body cells. And again, when I say used as energy, I don't mean the glucose turns into energy. I mean that is now being burned for cellular respiration and being exhaled. Okay, and there we lose another glucose. So that's sort of the general overall what's going on with the food we eat. We've talked a lot about cellular respiration, but now this gives you some idea also of biosynthesis and digestion that leads to biosynthesis. Of course, foods we digest also lead to cellular respiration as well. If you go back to that chart where it had like the 2 branches, first we digest, then we use for cellular respiration or biosynthesis. And again, most of what we eat is actually used in cellular respiration. Some is used for biosynthesis. Please add questions to the comment section or ask them in class.